Welcome back to BeFM Drama, where all this week we're bringing you our adaptation of The Stockbroker's Clerk, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In our third episode, we continue the story of Hall Pycroft, a young stockbroker's clerk in London who found himself on hard times after losing his job in the aftermath of a market crash. Pycroft finally succeeded in being offered a good position at a firm called Mawson's in London. Just before he could begin his work, however, Pycroft was persuaded to turn down the offer by a mysterious gentleman calling himself Arthur Pinner, who offered the clerk a huge sum of money if he agreed to work with his business, the Franco-Midland Hardware Company, which Arthur Pinner manages with his brother, Harry, in Birmingham. As we rejoin the story, Hall Pycroft, Holmes, and Watson are traveling together by train to Birmingham, and Pycroft is continuing to tell the bizarre story that finally led him to seek the help of the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes. The morning after he'd met Harry Pinner and agreed to accept his offer, Hall Pycroft set off to Birmingham in the train that would take him on time to his appointment with Arthur Pinner at the offices of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company. He took his things to a hotel in New Street and then made his way down to the address that had been given to him. He was 15 minutes early, but thought it wouldn't make much difference. He found that the address he'd been given was for a passageway between two large shops, and he began to feel uneasy as he followed the passage down a narrow alley to a winding stone stair. There were many flats opening onto the stairwell, rented as offices to both companies and individual businessmen. The names of the businesses in the building were painted on the wall at the bottom of the stairwell, but there was no Franco-Midland Hardware Company listed. Pycroft stood for a few minutes with his heart in his boots, wondering if the whole thing had been an elaborate hoax, when suddenly a man came up from behind him and called out his name. When Pycroft turned around, he found a man very like the one he'd met in his boarding house the day before. He had the same figure and voice, but was clean-shaven, and his hair was lighter. There was no question that this was Arthur Pinner.
Are you Mr. Hall Pycroft?
Yes.
Oh, I was expecting you, but you are a little early. I received a note from my brother this morning in which he sang your virtues very loudly.
I was just looking for the offices when you came.
We have not gotten our name up yet. We only rented these offices last week. Come with me, and we'll talk the matter over in the office.
Pycroft followed him up to the very top floor, and there, in the attic, were a couple of empty, dirty little rooms, uncarpeted and without curtains, into which Arthur Pinner led him. Pycroft had expected a large, bustling office with shining tables and rows of clerks, and stared around himself with dismay at the two folding chairs and the one little card table, which, along with a ledger and a wastepaper basket, were the only furniture in the whole place. Pinner saw the unhappy expression on Pycroft's face.
Don't be disheartened, Mr. Pycroft. Rome was not built in a day, and we have lots of money at our backs, though our office might not be particularly fancy. Please sit down and let me have your letter.
Pycroft gave it to him, and he read it over carefully.
You seem to have made a huge impression on my brother, Arthur, and I know that he's a good judge of character. He's a London man, and I, Birmingham, but this time I'll follow his advice. Please consider yourself officially employed.
What are my duties?
You'll eventually manage the great depot in Paris, which will pour a flood of English crockery into the shops of 134 agents in France. The purchase will be completed in a week, and meanwhile, you'll remain in Birmingham and make yourself useful.
How?
For answer, Pinner took a big red book out of a drawer.
This is a business directory of Paris. I want you to take it home with you and mark off all the hardware sellers along with their addresses. It would be of the greatest use for me to have them.
Surely there are classified lists available.
Not reliable ones. Their system is different from ours. Stay at it, and let me have the lists by Monday at 12. Good day, Mr. Pycroft. If you continue to show zeal and intelligence, you'll find this company a good master.
Pycroft went back to his hotel with the heavy Paris directory under his arm and with a very conflicted feelings in his heart. On the one hand, he definitely had work, and a check for £100 in his pocket. On the other, the empty, dirty offices, the absence of a business name on the wall, and a lack of other employees had left a bad impression on him as to the position of his employers. But in the end, he thought it didn't matter. He had his money and had already made his decision, for good or ill. Pycroft settled down to the mindless task that had been assigned to him. All day Sunday he was kept hard at work, yet by Monday he had only gotten as far as H. He went round to see his employer and found Harry Pinner in the same desolate, empty office, and was told to keep at it until Wednesday, and then to come by again. On Wednesday, the work was still unfinished, so Pycroft hammered away until Friday, that is, yesterday. With the list finally completed, he brought it round to Mr. Harry Pinner.
Thank you very much. I fear that I underestimated the difficulty of the task. This list will be a very great assistance to me.
It took some time.
And now, I want you to make a list of the furniture shops, for they all sell crockery.
Very good.
And you could stop by tomorrow evening at 7 to let me know how you're doing. Don't overwork yourself. A couple of hours at the music hall in the evening would do you so good after all your hard work.
He laughed as he spoke, and Pycroft saw with a sudden thrilling shock of suspicion and dismay that Pinner's second tooth on the left-hand side had been badly filled with gold. Sherlock Holmes rubbed his hands together with delight as Pycroft reached this point in the story, and I stared with astonishment at the young man seated across the compartment from me.
You look surprised, Dr. Watson, that such a minor detail would have so great an effect on me. When I was speaking to the other Pinner brother in London last week, he laughed when I agreed to turn down the job at Mawson's, and I happened to notice that his tooth was stuffed with gold in exactly the same way. In both cases, the glint of gold in the man's mouth caught my eye. When I saw Arthur Pinner's tooth and put it together with his voice and figure, I suddenly realized that I was talking to the same man. There's no doubt. Of course, you might expect two brothers to be similar, but not so much that they would have the exact same tooth stuffed with gold in the exact same way. When Pinner told me to go back to the hotel and continue my work, I found myself in the street, hardly knowing which way to turn. Back at the hotel, I put my head in a basin of cold water and tried to think it out. Why had Pinner sent me from London to Birmingham? Why had he gotten there before me? And why had he written a letter from himself to himself? It was altogether too much for me to understand, and bizarre to the point of being sinister. And then it suddenly struck me that what was incomprehensible to me might be perfectly clear to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I just had time to get back to London by the night train and see him this morning, and to bring you both back with me to Birmingham.
There was a pause after the stockbroker's clerk had finished telling his strange story. Then Sherlock Holmes cocked his eye towards me, leaning back on the cushions with a pleased yet thoughtful face, like a wine connoisseur who has just taken his first sip of a rare vintage.
Rather fine, Watson, is it not? There are points in it which please me. I think you will agree with me that an interview with Mr. Arthur Harry Pinner in the temporary offices of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company Limited would be a rather interesting experience for both of us.
But how can we do it?
Oh, easily enough. You two are friends of mine who are in need of work, and what could be more natural than that I should introduce you to my managing director?
Quite so. Of course, I should like to have a look at the gentleman and see if I can make anything of his little game.
Holmes began biting his nails and staring blankly out of the window, and we never spoke another word until the engine screeched to a halt at New Street Station in the great northern industrial hub of Birmingham. We've come to the end of the third episode in our 5-part adaptation of The Stockbroker's Clerk here on BeFM Drama, and to the end of young Hall Pycroft's strange tale. Tune in tomorrow evening as Holmes prepares to confront the mysterious Mr. Pinner and uncover the purpose of the strange trick he's played on the stockbroker's clerk by posing as his own brother and luring Mr. Pycroft to the oddly empty offices of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company in Birmingham. From our studios in Busan, this is your host, Joshua Cornell.